Hello and welcome to another episode of the JRE Review, where each week me and often a guest will review the best and most interesting episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience and talk about things we liked, things that were inspiring, questions that we had, things we didn't understand, anything that we thought was amusing. And this podcast, 1217, with Nimesh Patel, that I'm reviewing, is a doozy. It's really good because it brings up some important points about what's going on right now in comedy, and especially at universities and so on. Nimesh Patel is the first Indian American writer for SNL. Very funny dude. Good comedian. He's been on Seth Meyers' late night show, and recently he went to a college, Columbia, and they turned off his mic for telling a joke that really isn't that offensive. You know, I mean, it just really isn't offensive because it's like pro the type of person he was talking about. I won't do the joke, but it was basically about the premise was like a black man wouldn't being gay can't be a choice because a black man wouldn't choose to be gay if he's already black because he's doubling down on hardship, right? So people found that offensive at the college, and after a while they said he was done after like 20 minutes. He had like 40 minutes left. So, you know, they ended up kind of kicking him out. And it brings up some interesting questions about what's going on with comedy right now, especially with the youth, like how sensitive everyone is. And is this really what the majority of people are thinking? Is this really the consensus of most people, or is this just a loud minority? I think it's probably just that. It's kind of crazy, but this really shook him. He didn't like it. He did, it was difficult. You had to go to another college right afterwards, and it's made people think, him especially, like, do I want to keep doing colleges? Even Jerry Seinfeld stopped doing colleges, and he couldn't have a more PC stand-up set list. But at the same time, is it worth it? Is it worth putting yourself out there? So Jeff Ross is friends with Nimesh and put him in contact with Joe for this podcast. And one thing that Joe reminded us of is that Jeff, when he was on recently with David Tell, said that he is a comedian before he's an American, which is an interesting point because it just means that for comedians, it's like, I'm here for the joke first, then everything else is second. We find the joke and we work back from it. It doesn't mean be offensive at any cost, but like that's a big part of what comedy is finding that. And then if you have, one person out of every 10 or 2 people out of every 30 that are really offended by everything you say, should the rest of those people miss out? I don't think so. I think that those 2 or 1 people should just not go to comedy. If you find yourself being that sensitive, don't go watch comedy. It doesn't make sense. It's like saying if you're scared of the dark, don't go into the dark. If you don't like violent movies, don't watch them. Like, that's your choice, but don't make it so no one else can watch them. It's getting silly. Then they start to move on to kind of the process of comedy, like how Joe does it, how Nimesh does it. And Joe is bringing up that really in the US, or maybe even around the world, there's only 100 or so legit comedians. They're very rare. 100 that you would pay for, 100 that you would go see, headliners that you would see. So it's a rare group of people. So when comedians see each other, meet each other, they really connect and bond, and they're like, oh, thank God you're a comedian too. We got something to talk about. They really all do get on. It's like, not to say a brotherhood, because there's plenty of women comedians but it's a comedianhood, and these guys all really do get on and love each other, and it's a pretty rare and special thing to be a part of. Joe talks about how he writes about an hour a day, and it's a good idea to get a corkboard with index cards if you are a comedian, because you can organize yourself well on there, which I really like the sound of. Obviously, when you think comedian, you don't always think super organized and super motivated, probably just funny. But you have to work hard, because you got a lot of people coming out to see you and you don't want to let them down. I have been out to comedy before and it was kind of drab, and it was someone I really wanted to see, and it was a real shame. It's something you don't forget, whereas for that performer it was just one night. Bill Burr told Joe once that he knows what it's like to go to a show and see someone and have it be disappointing, and he remembers that, and that's why every time he goes out, he just does his very best and makes sure that he crushes as hard as he can, because people paid to come out and see you perform. They probably got babysitters. It was probably a big deal to them. So it might just be one night to the performer, but it means a lot to the people that watch often. And it just goes to show the pressure that these guys put on themselves to be as good as they are, and it's really admirable. I'm really impressed. Joe also talks about his favorite little saying: how you do everything is how you do anything. And in a lot of ways, people sabotage their own lives. And what he meant by that is, he was saying to Nimesh that, instead of doing really well at things, you can kind of just like fuck something up once and be like, oh, I'm no good at that, I don't have to do that again. And it just takes the pressure off of trying. And that's often why people do that. That's why they kind of sabotage themselves. It's almost like a coping mechanism for not having too much on your shoulder. Give you a break, but yeah, that's no way to be, for sure. They do talk about a little bit about how lots of people think they can do stand-up, and I've seen this before. You talk about doing stand-up ever, and somebody will turn around and say, oh, I want to try that, I'm very funny, I think I could do it. And the issue with that, from what Joe was saying to Nimesh, is like, really, it's because that's what we do. We do most of it all the time. We can talk and sometimes say funny things, so therefore you think you can make people laugh, and that's just not how it is, because it's just very different. It's like when you're up there, I've been to open mics where I've seen people bomb so hard, and it's unbelievable, and they're perfectly capable of holding a conversation, but it's a different world when you're up there and getting the timing down and reading the room, and yeah, it's not for the faint of hearted, for sure. And there's really no straight line to learning as well. I mean, Nimesh was talking about how everyone's kind of a bit different. Like, you can't go to classes, you can't go and get taught how to do comedy, because everyone has their own style and there's no right way. Those comedy classes are kind of BS. I did one once and it was a joke. I left halfway through the week. After like 3 days, I was like, I don't think I'm learning shit, this is ridiculous. And it's just because how you learn it is you go up and do open mics, and it's brutal. But it is kind of a shame. It's almost a shame that there isn't like a better teaching strategy for it. But it's such a personalized thing. It's not like learning an instrument. You can just copy somebody until you get it down and then write your own music. It just doesn't work like that with comedy, really, from what Joe has described and what I understand of it. And it's excuse me, it's like everyone's act really is different. That's the big thing. And when people have completely different styles, your personal style will be different. You can't really copy anyone, even if you like their style. Maybe you have some similarities to it, but you do any stand-up long enough and you'll just develop your own, they call it developing your voice. That's what's going to happen, and it's going to change your whole setup, and you'll be your own unique comedian. That's it. I guess all you can do as a comic is inspire others, like these guys do, because they're both very funny. And a big thing about comedy and working hard for these guys is that people come and watch their comedy, as Joe was saying, and they give up their precious time. And, really, laughter makes you feel better, right? So that's what they're going for. They want to make you feel better. And Nimesh said something interesting. He goes, yeah, it's a drug. We're like, comedians are drug dealers, because you're giving out the drug of like happiness, which I thought was really funny. I like that a lot. It's clever too, very clever. He's a smart dude. They talk briefly about just some rich people. They get into Elon Musk and how he's net positive for the world, which I agree with. And they talk about how Mark Zuckerberg is not really. And recently, Mark, I guess, tweeted that what's good for the world isn't necessarily good for Facebook. And that's pretty shocking. Like, you got enough money. What the fuck is that all about? Then something interesting went down where Joe said that he was getting shit for not having an opinion about Louis C.K. And some news article I read this morning about Louis is that he's come out with some more jokes, and there was some leak audio, and people are just all over him again. I mean, it really looks like people are just doing everything they can to destroy that guy. And what's going to make it rough for Louis is he's so funny, but his jokes were always... they were pretty dark a lot of the time, and it's tough for him to come back now with a target on his chest, because almost everything he says is a little bit fucked up, but that's his comedy. So unless he changes that completely, it's going to be so tough for him to bounce back. I really hope he can. I'm a huge fan of his work and his comedy, and you know, it's not my place to say, like, what he did sounds weird and fucked up, but it's not, I don't know, I don't think it's the worst thing, and you know, maybe he is very sorry and it wasn't necessarily illegal, so you know, can he be sorry and come back? I don't know, that's up for the fans, I think. That's how it has to go. But you know, back to Joe not having an opinion about Louis C.K. He's like, fuck it, I don't need one. I don't have to have one. If you can't handle offensive stuff, don't go to a comedy show. You know, the people are just being really sensitive. Joe gives the expression, if you don't want to get mud on your hands, don't do any gardening. It's kind of like that. It's like what I was saying earlier. It's and then they move on to, you know, how people are being deplatformed on Patreon. They're taking away people's ability to make money, and they're choosing who they are based on their opinions, which is a slippery slope. So a lot of you know, deep thinkers like Sam Harris and so on have pulled themselves off Patreon, and you can get donation money other ways, but it's just this, like, the overall theme of their conversation was like a freedom of speech portion that leads into, you can have offensive opinions as long as they don't incite violence. You can have ones that, you know, jokes that are taboo, and you know, again, you have the right not to listen, but you shouldn't be able to shut people down. It's just really dangerous, and you know, I really do disagree with stifling free speech, you know, within reason. I mean, you can't just be shouting racist stuff, but I mean, even the crazy people that are wrong have the right to speak it, and we all come together and educate each other and make a better decision. I think it's a good way for me to learn. But anyway, guys, that's the last one of the reviews for this year. Moving into 2019, getting some new equipment and working on some new editing processes so things will sound better, and then just kind of figuring out a new way to break these down and make them interesting. But thank you for listening and subscribing all year. I really appreciate it, and see you in 2019. Peace.